Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you very much to organizer for inviting me to be the moderator for this session. It's after lunch. You just had rice for your lunch, so it's going to be quite challenging for you to stay awake. So I hope that me and my fellow panelists here will try our best to, to make this session to be engaging, so that you don't, doze off. Maybe what I'll do later on, if I see people are already going to sleep, I'll probably ask you to stand up so that we can stay awake. Yeah? All right. My name, as introduced just now, is Othman Abdullah from Silverlake Group of Companies. There was a lot of mention about Silverlake earlier today, but there was question, one or two questions from me that what is it that we do? What does Silverlake do? Yeah, Silverlake is a digital economy and fintech solution provider. We provide. Silverlake was formed in 1989. We are very well known for the core banking, traditional core banking provider, as I mentioned during the morning session if you are here. But in addition to that, we have also evolved together with the banking industry. We are also providing all this fintech and digital banking solution as well. So in addition to our modernized Silverlake integrated banking system, we also have a total end-to-end digital banking solution called Mobius Digital Solution. All right. I actually wear a few hats in Silverlake, but I'm mostly known as the person in charge of Islamic Banking and Finance Solution in Silverlake Group of Companies. Okay, that's about me. Okay, the topic of our panel session, if you can read there, sustainable banking, the way forward towards sustainability and enhancing ESG. Yeah? E stands for environment, S stands for social, and G stands for governance issues in banking. And why are we talking about this in a banking summit? Yeah, why are we talking about environment, social, and governance? Nowadays, new normal, we are wearing face masks. But before this, we wear face masks when every year we have this haze that we have to face, right? Every year. This year so far we have not had haze, but this is replaced by this COVID-19. Why? It's because of the environmental impact. That too heavy development that has caused some challenges to the environment that we have to endure. I do not know to call whether this COVID-19 pandemic is a blessing or as a response of a Mother Earth to fix the nature. Because if you remember, during the total lockdown, well, in Malaysia, it wasn't a total lockdown, but it was, only essential services can operate. In March and April, you saw that there was this viral on a very clear river. Yeah, the river water were very clear. You can see fish, swimming. You can see blue sky. Yeah, from quite a number of parts in Kuala Lumpur, you can actually see blue sky, and we are very happy about it because the environment, the nature is fixing itself, right? And this is definitely very relevant because we do need development, but we need sustainable development. So what is sustainable development? Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So we borrow this earth from the future generation. So we are responsible to make sure that when we are no longer around, they can still enjoy their life and make use of this nature. So and banks, as the money can conduit to this development, can play a role for sustainable development. But how well the banks doing, this is some of the issues that we are going to talk about today. How are the banks already doing this to help protect the environment? Are they doing very well? What else can be done? Some report cards. Okay, some of these very knowledgeable panelists will be able to share with us today. A very brief outline of how this session will be organized. After this short introduction from me, each panelist will take about 8 minutes to share their perspective on sustainable banking. Then we will have 10 to 15 minutes Q&A. Finally, I will do a short wrap-up. So for the benefits of those who are not well exposed to the concept of sustainable banking integrates environmental, social, and governance criteria into traditional bank and set ESG benefit as a key objective. Yeah. So with sustainable banking, banks cannot just focus on profitability, but also must consider the environment, social, and governance impact. And they have to be addressed by all stakeholders in the banks, yeah, from as far as the board to all the way to all the employees. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce all our panelists today. We do have a big number of panelists, so in the interest of time, I'll do a very brief introduction. On my right hand most, we have Mr. Eddie Ho, who is the Managing Director of Elegant Hallmark Berhad. Elegant Hallmark provides business consulting and advisory on specialized financing. Mr. Ho is a chartered banker with 26 of experience in commercial and corporate banking. Yeah. So maybe give a hand to Mr. Ho. Next, we have Dato Badlisyah Abdul Ghani, who is a prominent Islamic banker. He's a president, Chartered Institute of Islamic Financial Professionals. He's also the former CEO of CIMB Islamic Bank Berhad. Datuk Badlisyah is an accomplished Islamic finance professional, not only in Malaysia, but also recognized as an Islamic finance leader globally, having won a few notable awards. So if you're interested to read the more detailed profile in your program, yeah, you can know more about our panelists here. And on right, give a hand to Datuk Badlisyah. Next, on my right, I have Datuk Noripah Kamso. Yeah. She is the former chairman of Bank Kerjasama Rakyat Malaysia, or Bank Rakyat, as we better know it. Just the last, probably about a month or so ago? 4 months ago, yeah. Prior to Bank Rakyat, Datuk Noripah was the CIMB Group, was with CIMB Group for more than 20 years, holding various key positions. Datuk Noripah is a very prominent lady banker. Yeah, in 2019, Datuk Noripah was ranked #1 by the Cambridge IFA as the most influential women in Islamic business and finance. Give applause to Datuk Noripah. Okay, on my left, according to list, I have Mr. Yee first, but I'll talk. Okay, on my left hand, we have Mr. Pramod Das, who is the Deputy Group CEO of RAM Holding Berhad, and CEO of RAM Sustainability, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of RAM. Yeah, Mr. Das leads RAM Group Sustainability Services and Environment, Social and Governance (ESG) Analytics. He has 24 years of experience in financial services industry, including 18 years at RAM Ratings. Right? Give a hand to Mr. Das. Next, we have Mr. Yee Wing Peng, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Deloitte Malaysia. Mr. Yee is also a chartered accountant with more than 25 years of experience in audit and tax, and has extensive experiences advising local and multinational companies. Mr. Yee was featured in the 2016 Guide to the World Leading Tax Advisors. Give a hand to Mr. Yee. And finally, we have this Dr. Adam. Great to be with Dr. Adam on this stage. We happened to attend the same class back in 2008 when I was doing my postgrad diploma in Islamic Banking and Finance in IUM. Yeah, so nice to be with you here, Dr. Adam Ng. Dr. Adam Ng is a sustainable finance expert at Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF-Malaysia. Dr. Adam specializes in developing sustainable finance policies, products, and solutions for the financial sector in Malaysia. Formerly the Deputy Director of Research Management Center and Associate Professor at the International Center for Education and INSIF. Dr. Adam has been involved in multiple research projects in collaboration with prominent institutions such as Ministry of Energy, Green Technology and Water, and the World Bank, just to name a few. Yeah. Okay, so now that I have introduced all my panelists, let us now go through the panel session by inviting the first panelist, Mr. Eddie, to share his thoughts. Right? Welcome, Mr. Eddie.
Thank you, Othman. Thank you, Tan Sri. Good afternoon to all of you. Can I have my slides up, please? So this topic, next. Okay, I know it's post-lunch, so I purposely put a very refreshing slides for you guys to enjoy. Many of us have not been traveling since January, I think. So very refreshing slides with a lot of greens, water, all these things. So basically, over the next 8 minutes, I'm given 8 minutes to go through all the slides. Not many, just 3 slides, yeah. So I'm going to talk about 3 areas. Number one, what is all about ESG? Yeah? Why should I will be talking from SME's perspective, yeah, enterprise. So why should SMEs adopt ESG in their business operation? Yeah? So the benefits of ESG or this thing. The second areas that I'm going to cover is if ESGs provide so much benefit, why are SMEs not actively embrace ESG in their business? What are the challenges that they are facing when they talk about ESG? So the third point that I wanted to bring across is how bankers like all of you can assist, the government, United Nations, everyone, to drive ESG, to help SMEs to adopt ESG in their business operation, all right? So what are the benefits of ESG to enterprises? So I have put up to segregate into 3 different areas. The first E is environmental. Environmental, when SMEs adopt this, what we call environmental factors into their business, means they will have they can improve their resource efficiency, right? So they will what do you call it, replace some of their energy savings. So they will do a few things. For example, in simple terms, it's 3 R's. How to reduce, to use less of those hazardous material in their business. How to reuse some of those, right? And how to recycle. 3 R's, I think, is very, very relevant for businesses, for SMEs, yeah? So they need to adopt all this practice so that they can help the world to be a better place, yeah? To improve the environment. And by doing so, they can also reduce the cost. Because if you, for example, on the water recycling, yeah? For some of the factories like rubber glove, we are talking about rubber glove every day. Yeah? So rubber glove is one industry that uses a lot of water. So they need to recycle, keep on recycle so they don't have to buy water from the government. So cost reduction, this is one of the benefits that SMEs can actually benefit. Yeah. So the second is about social. What is social? Social is all about how you treat your customers. Your employees. Yeah. Occupational rights. Are you giving them fair treatment? So of late, I met some of these SMEs. So I was asking them, hey, are you benefiting from Prihatin, where the governments are offering some, wage subsidies for your employees? So some of these SMEs actually told me, no, boss, I couldn't enjoy it. I say, why? Because they never even pay SOCSO for the employees. That's why they are not qualified to apply for these wage subsidies. So this is not good, right? Because, this is something that it should be given to the customers, to their staff, SOCSO contribution, yeah? So and it's all about social, also about relationship with the community. So if you are operating in that area, make sure you are treating all the stakeholders fairly and in a good manner, yeah? And of course, lastly is the governance. Governance is very important. I think just now in the holding room, we talk about, discuss about governance in a very briefly. So even large corporates are facing difficulties in observing some of the governance issues. So now coming to SMEs. So governance is not something that is easy to adopt by the SMEs, but they have to place a lot more emphasis and energy into this area. So how to improve the risk management, identify some of the risks, then how to mitigate the risk, yeah. And corporate governance. The one very important area that I want to identify that is related to the SMEs is the Anti-Corruption Act, yeah, under the MSCC, because some of those SMEs, they just want to bulldoze, they will do whatever they want to get things done. So this is something that they need to look at. So ESG, if the business, the SMEs or enterprises get it done it right, so it can help to enhance the enterprise value, yeah. And in longer term, they will be categorized as a responsible enterprise. So these are the benefits of adopting ESG in their businesses, where SMEs need to be aware of. And again, why are they not doing it? Yeah, because SME, some may know, some may not know about it. So why are they not adopting this ESG in their business? So external factors, I mean, there's not a requirement. There's no law that forcing them to adopt, right? If there's no push from the top, why bother? SMEs is always firefighting most of the time, right? So they have limited resources, limited capital, all these things. So if there is no drive from the top, very unlikely that they will do it. Yeah. And the second one is lack of incentive. If I do it, why? So how? Will I get some tax rebate on this? So it's not clearly stipulated by the authorities. So there's really no incentive even from the bankers like you guys, right? So if as any different in treatment when you someone who is adopting ESG and non-ESG, they are banking with you. So internally, most of the SMEs, I dare to say many SMEs are not even aware what is ESG. If you ask them what is ESG, have you even heard about SDG? I can tell you 80% of them, they will shake their head. No, what is ESG? They do not know, right? So the lack of awareness, they don't even know. And even those are 20% that know about ESG, their concern is about cost. How much money do I need to fork out if I want to implement ESG in my business? So cost is another factor, right? And the third one, even if they have the money, if they know the importance, the benefit, all these things, do they have the people to run it or not? Many SMEs are make up of a husband and wife team, right? They don't have the expertise. And if you were to ask them to engage Deloitte to do it, they say, no, sorry, thank you. Yeah, Deloitte are too expensive for them. So expertise is the other area that preventing SMEs into engaging ESG. Yeah. So how banks like you guys, bankers like you guys can help to SMEs to be more proactive in this area? Number one, education. You have to educate them. Tell them. Because bankers meet your customers at least 3-4 times a year. So every time you have lunch with them, go to karaoke, talk first before you sing. So educate them what is ESG. Yeah, this is important. Educate them the importance, the benefits of embracing ESG in their business. The engagement. So when you do CSR project, let's say you decided to bring your team for beach cleaning in Port Dickson, right? This is some of the initiative. Then invite some of your customers to join force with you. So to enhance the awareness about the ESG, and lastly about incentive. If the customers were to embrace this one, what kind of incentive are you going to give them? Are you going to give them some discount in terms of fees, any kind of privileges? And maybe you can give some awards to these people, the best customers in terms of ESG adoption, all these things. So by doing so, then you can actually live up to your status as a sustainable banks and to champion the SDG as well. Okay. That's about my presentation. Yeah, 8 minutes up. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. You mentioned about if SME were to incorporate ESG into their operations and all that will enhance their values, right? They will be known as responsible enterprise. But however, unfortunately, most of them are even not aware. Probably they don't have enough awareness and probably enough incentive to incorporate all these ESG values into their companies. And you suggest that for the banks to, provide some education and to give incentives to the SMEs. But the question that I have, would the banks themselves have the incentive or not to provide incentive to all these SMEs? Right next to you, after this, we have two bankers, which I think, will be able to dwell on that. Yeah. Just to keep the situation engaging, I just want to ask audience, when we talk about this sustainable development, there's this 17 SDGs that have been established. Can anyone in the audience here share with all of us 3 of the SDGs? Volunteer. What are at least 3 SDGs? You can Google. There's 17 of them. One is like zero hunger, for example. No poverty. I already mentioned 2. Yeah. Audience, come. Yes. Clean water, right. Anyone else? Sorry? Livelihood, is there such thing? Life below water, yes. Life below water. Dato Noripah remembers all the 17. One more. Sorry? Gender equality, income equality. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Just want to make sure that you stay awake. Okay, I would like to now call upon our second panelist, Datuk Badlisyah, to give his introductory thoughts. 8 minutes, yes.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to everyone. First of all, thank you for having me here to discuss about this subject on sustainable banking. Sustainable banking exists in order to support sustainable development. It is not there on its own. It is there, it came about with the intention to support the sustainable development agenda as promoted by international bodies like the United Nations, like the World Bank and the likes. We all talk about SDG today, but many of us will probably never recall how it came about. I think in order to execute something, we should always appreciate why it came about. It is very relatively new, right? It started with the call for social banking. That is the first incarnation of SDG. Everybody talk about being socially responsible when they do banking and when they do investment. That's way back in 1970s. The first SRI fund that was ever established was in 1971 to support infrastructure development. When you talk about doing things that is sustainable, in the beginning, people were only concerned about large infrastructure projects. So you want to do a dam, you want to do a power plant and things like that. So you must make sure that those investment, those infrastructure development are done in a manner that is sustainable, that protects the environment, creates jobs, and high-paying jobs for that matter. And then we have this thing called ethical banking coming after social banking. And we need to be ethical because there were so many frauds happening within the market. And people were, okay, aside from being socially responsible, we need to be ethical about doing it. Right? And of course, ethical leads to governance under SDG today. Right? And all of a sudden, after social, after ethical, green banking came into the picture. Everybody wants to be very, very aligned with Greenpeace, I guess. So they call it green banking. Protect the environment, protect nature, beyond just the surface of it, right? To take care of biodiversity, to go deeper into being green and protecting the planet. And this was just talk, right? It was never institutionalized, and subsequently it was taken up by the World Bank. The World Bank then promoted, come up with a guideline or a framework so that in anything that I will support in the future, any development, any funding, you must comply with my framework on all these things. And then later on we have the Millennium Development Goals, right? What is it? Millennium something goal. This is the precursor to SDG. Right? So there were only 8 things that they wanted. Do not ask me to list down what those 8 are. It's definitely broader than the 17 that we have today under SDG. So that one was up until 2015, and we did not meet those goals. Right? We failed. The world failed to meet the MDG. Replaced by the SDG in 2015 to be achieved in 2030. To achieve this sustainable development goal, the 17 goals, we need to spend about $7 trillion a year from 2015 in order to be able to achieve the goals by 2030. We are only spending about 1.5 trillion a year over the last few years, well, since SDG started. And it's probably dropping after COVID. Right? So when we talk about SDG, we must understand where we are in its implementation. So this what I'm just sharing to you is the global perspective. Right? What about Malaysia? Right? Sustainable banking and sustainable development in Malaysia, I don't think if you ask anyone on this stage or anyone out there, the data set that will allow us to know where we stand in terms of sustainable development, it doesn't exist. There are probably some data. The question is whether the data is clean, whether the data is reliable. It's still debatable, right? So, year in, year out, we have a topic on SDG, but my question is, do we really know where we stand when it comes to doing sustainable banking to support SDG in Malaysia, at least, right? We must have that answer, and I'm sad to say that inquiries that I have made, perhaps I have not inquired in the right places, but the inquiries that I have made, I have not been able to find the right data set that will allow me to gauge where we stand. And then, so that's the broad perspective. Then you talk about specifically sustainable banking itself. Why would banks do it, right? Banks do it because we need to make sure that we do things in a manner that protects nature. We do things in a manner that protects life support, right? Life support means what are the resources that we need, human being needs from nature. Right? We need to sustain those resources, right? When you talk about nature, you talk about biodiversity, right? But when you talk about life support, it's about the resources itself. Then the third one, banking. Banks do sustainable banking, or encourage to do sustainable banking. At the end of the day, is to protect the people, to create jobs, create wealth, sustain the community, preserve culture. That's the reason why banks are encouraged to do sustainable banking, so that we can achieve those things within the ambit of the overall SDG. Right? But to do that, banks have to consider the triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line is profit, people, and planet. In board discussion nowadays, if you scrutinize the minutes, I do not believe you will find any discussion about the planet or the people. There's a lot of discussion on profit, on profitability. So when it comes to, see, there's only this triple bottom line is the hallmark of SDG. All right? If you're not discussing this triple bottom line at the board, you are not doing SDG. You are not supporting SDG. That's basic, right? So the litmus test whether a bank is really doing and is really committed to SDG and doing sustainable banking is if you discuss profit, people, and the planet in your board discussion, in your management discussion. That's one basic issue that we have to do self-reflection. In terms of day-to-day, the biggest problem of doing sustainable banking is essentially finding the bankable transactions out there. You talk about the SMEs just now, right? A lot of things can be very feasible, right? But the moment you impute SDG requirement within your bankable transaction, many of the SMEs, many of the corporate becomes non-bankable. But if you strip out the SDG requirement, on a traditional basis, it's bankable. They could have supported it, but because SDG, it make the feasible transaction unbankable, and therefore sustainable banking is not sustainable. I leave it at that first. We can have a discussion.
Sustainable banking is not sustainable. Okay, thanks, Dato' Badlisyah. So you started off by saying that, the precursor to all this sustainable banking, there was this social banking, and then there was this ethical banking. Making me wonder, there have to be such, initiative to make the bank ethical, to make the bank to be social. Naturally, are the banks not ethical? Are the bank not social? Are they just after the profitability, or just after the profit? Maybe this is a question that, I just basically raised it as a point. I'm not sure whether, I don't think we can answer that. And you mentioned about, as it is today, even though sustainable banking, SDG, ESG have been discussed for many, many years, but in reality, we don't even have the data set yet in Malaysia today. And you mentioned about if you scrutinize the minutes at the board level, you don't see this item being discussed, right? But that is critical, because in order for us to, give incentive to the banks, overall stakeholders, it must be driven down from the top level. So therefore, at the board level, they have to have this initiative. They have to have this strategies. Then only it can be promoted downward, which I think naturally flow to my next speaker, Dato' Noripah, who's the previous chairman of Bank Rakyat. Yeah. So, Dato' Noripah, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Othman. Ladies and gentlemen, disruptive changes in our ecosystem really hit me when I watched BBC Earth a few months ago, and I saw 2 documentary films that really devastated me. It left a very long-term imprint in my memory, and I saw 2 documentary films. The first was these poor villages in coastal Bangladesh desperately throwing sands into the sea using sandbags. But the rising water that hits the shores was just too strong that I saw the shores they were standing collapsed under their feet. And then I also saw their houses and their cows being swallowed by the rising water. And I cried. And the second documentary which I saw was looking at the meat on your dinner and your lunch table today. It contains a piece of the forest. United States, for example, consumed 10 billion kg of meat per annum. And the lungs of the earth, as you know, is the Amazon forest. And that has been deforested for cattle rearing to a scale unimaginable. It is 3 times the size of United Kingdom. And in 10 years' time, we are going to have a population growth of 2.2 billion people to feed, which means another 40% increase in cattle. Should we stop eating meat? So apparently, the greenhouse effect of 1 cow can hit 600 liters of petrol. We now have 1.5 billion cows on this earth that can generate the combined greenhouse effect of carbon emissions of cars and plane combined. So my next 4 minutes is taking us the way forward. I'm going to tie up what Eddie has mentioned about the SME and the challenges that Dato' Badlisyah mentioned, which I'm quite challenged to show some solution. So the question now is not what is the role of SDG in banking, but the question, in my opinion, is what is the role of banking towards achieving the SDG? Now, despite the regulators in Malaysia, like Securities Commission and Bank Negara Malaysia, being on top of the game with their SRI and Sustainable Sukuk framework, and also Bank Negara recently issued a discussion paper on principle-based taxonomy, which Dr. Adam is going to mention. The problem now is, like Dato Badlisyah said, the problem is at the bank, who are slow to adapt, to redesign, to remodel, to reshape, to reconstruct, to recontour, to everything, to realign. So the question is, should we offer carrot or should we actually cane them? Should they be using plaster or bayonet, or should they look at the long-term strategy? Now, to have a long-term impact and not just a band-aid, I view that all sukuk, whether it is sovereign or whether it's corporate, has to be mandatory green. So that way, all proceeds will be channeled into the SDG aspiration, especially two very important crises which we are facing now, which is the climate crisis and also the income inequality crisis. Research has actually validated that floods and also droughts have showed the fastest rate of increase. Green sukuk arguably can provide a catalyst, Dato' Badlisyah, to the role of banking in SDGs by causing a chain reaction to three levels of capital market players. Number one, firstly, policy response. From policy response, from the political willpower for nation building itself. So all national fund raising is best through issuance of sovereign green sukuk. The green sukuk, we mentioned earlier, will automatically empower down the whole national ecosystem, Eddie, including your SME, towards green projects like energy, transportation, building, waste management, renewable energy, decent work, economic growth, reduced inequality, just like what Indonesia did in its sovereign sukuk. So these green projects will, while creating a positive social impact, it supports the national economic recovery of our GDP targets. This crucial step, like Dato' Badlisyah mentioned, towards financing the country's infrastructure in a sustainable, compliant way post-pandemic recovery is also important for the sovereign to go beyond GDP to measure the national progress. So the pandemic, what has it taught us? The pandemic has taught us that economic progress should include social progress and growth of well-being. So measuring using GDP is only goods and services, which will measure the wrong thing, and we will get the wrong answer. Secondly, the beneficiaries from the proceeds of this sovereign green sukuk, those businesses and SME who are awarded these contracts, will go to the bank for green financing. Currently, we have brown financing, but these SMEs and businesses will go for green financing to the bank. So this way, we can encourage business communities and the banks, Dato' Badlisyah, to capitalize on Malaysia's sustainable economic recovery for business growth. So this will speed up the bank in rating the customers to not only to be Sharia compliant, but also to be sustainable compliant. It will speed up the banks, no more greenwashing, speed up the bank into preparedness in their policies and procedures, evaluation process and parameters on risk tolerance and risk appetite, identifying target markets in exposure limits. The sustainability risk will be part of credit risk assessment for approval. In fact, to answer what Eddie mentioned, banks can dangle the carrot in the form of preferential rates to the SME and to businesses, which is also in tandem with government tax exemption for the bank, which they're currently giving. This as incentive for businesses that has the preparedness towards mitigating climate risk and inequality risk. So this way, it's faster for banks to establish a green assets database, which will be useful for the next supply chain of action, which is number 3. The third and final stop is for banks to use these accumulated green assets base as eligible assets for utilization for the issuance of green sukuk as part of the bank's capital raising exercise. So besides using clients' deposit, all banks regularly issue sukuk, right, to raise its capital to further finance its lending activities or asset growth. In this case, the green asset base is already in existence, and it is precipitated by the policy changes at the sovereign level. Ladies and gentlemen, so in conclusion, banks can change life too. Banks are proxy to the economy. Climate change happens with a limited biosphere where the bank operates. The banks and policymakers need to appreciate that the devastation that I saw in the 2 documentaries of the planet at the expense of my great-grandchildren, at the expense of future generation, and that is really unacceptable. That our prosperity today, ladies and gentlemen, is at the expense of our descendants, and that is unacceptable. So banks being proxy to the economy is the most powerful platform to influence economic activities to comply with SDG. And the 3 Ps, if I can rearrange what Dr. Badlisyah said, in my board meeting in Bank Rakyat, we used people, planet, progress, in that order. But he just now used profit, planet, people. So my order is different. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainable finance can be used to reshape a more resilient, socially just, and environmentally safe world, while progressing to a digital world, which we discussed this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato. Just a quick clarification. Yeah, you mentioned about if banks were to have all these green sukuk, green financing initiatives, they will be getting some tax exemption for this, is it? Oh, okay. Then that answers my question. What will be the incentive then for banks if they were to give the incentive to the SMEs? Okay, so I believe the audience would agree with me that Dato' Noripah talks about this with such a great passion. Yeah, she started off with sharing with you how she was moved by watching the documentaries about, the impact to the environment and all that. And then she asked a question: what is the role of the bank toward achieving the SDG goal? Yeah, it's about not what SDG can do to the bank, is actually what the banks can do to help achieve the SDG goals. And as I mentioned earlier at the start of this session, I believe that banks can do a lot, because bank is really the conduit of money for the development. So if banks actually provide the incentive, for example, when you want to finance SME, you have to give some kind of condition to the SMEs that you have to operate your business in such a way that you are more responsible to the environment. You give jobs to the less privileged people, the single mothers, the handicapped people, for example, right? So therefore you get preferential rate, yeah? So these are the very least things that at least the banks can do, and at the same time, banks are getting incentive for that. And for the banks to raise capital, then they can issue green sukuk, green financing, which are more environmental friendly. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dato' Noripah. Okay, now let me move on to Mr. Pramod Das next to me to talk about, to give your introductory remarks.
Thank you. I need a bit of crowd participation. Can each of you, if you have a piece of paper, write the word sustainability? I'll give you 20 seconds. It's very important because I'm going to give you all the points now. Okay. So have you all spelled the word sustainability? Okay, if you spelled the word out, can you raise your hands, please, so I know? Okay. So at least some blood circulation is going on. Okay, now take your pen or pencil and draw a straight line through the first letter. From the top to the bottom, right in the center. What do you get? You get a dollar sign. So my entire message to you here is, to do sustainability, you need to align it to profitability. If you don't, in any industry, it's not going to be sustainable. And you look at the S again, it needs to be aligned to strategy. So the concept about sustainability, incidentally, got to me in a very interesting way. We all think about what brought you to this room. I have a very clear pathway that got me to this room. Ironically, it started from an email I got in August 2015 from WWF, who's on stage here, which I almost deleted. One of Dr. Adams' colleagues, Tiaga, reached out to me. WWF had a group that looked at sustainable finance. And they were coming to see Bank Negara and Bursa, and they said, meeting a rating agency is important because they have an influencing power in terms of opinions in the financial sector. So I arranged for a meeting. And since that point of time, I've been an advocate for sustainable finance. That's what got me to this stage. I can talk about it for 3 days, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm an analyst. I come from the dark side of the force. I'm as Darth Vader as you can be. But I have made a transition. And I've based it on the same principle. It's as simple as that. But let me put some numbers to it. Whether you like it or not, the money that is circulating in the system is gaining a conscience. Whether the conscience is also aligned to the profit-making side, I'm not too particular, but if it helps the planet, it will move the needle. So if you look at UNEP-FI, responsible banking banks, there's about 47 trillion that is tied in there. If you look at sustainable stock exchanges, there are close to 50,000 companies, 90 out of the 96 stock exchanges that are part of sustainable stock exchanges. So that means companies that need to have sustainability reporting. The International Organization of Securities Commissions came out last year and said that when companies tap the financial markets, they need to have environment, social, and governance disclosures. The network of financial greening of financial systems, where Bank Negara is part of, basically is the gang of central banks also looking at ways to go green. I like this particular figure because RAM is also very close to this. If you take the principles of responsible investing, if you go back, the history starts with Kofi Annan asking corporates and the institutional investors to get into this act as well. The principles of responsible investing encourage investors or asset owners to look at environment, social, and governance factors in their investing process. So it's very important because these are the owners of these listed companies or banks or insurance companies and so on. In 2006, assets under management by the principles of responsible investing globally was $6.5 trillion US. Okay, you can add all the zeros at the back. $6.5 trillion US. They had 63 signatories. In 2019, can anyone hazard a guess how many trillion this amount is? Is it 20 trillion? 40 trillion? 85 trillion? You can vote, you know. So how many things is only about 10 trillion? 40 trillion? 85 trillion? No crowd participation. I might come out there and ask you one by one afterwards. Okay, I'll give you the answer. It was 85 or 86 trillion in 2019. So usually before I come and do these things, these numbers are hard-coded into my brain, but I always make it a point to update them. Can you guess what the number is in 2020? Any brave volunteers? Dato Noripah, can you guess? It moved from 85 trillion to 103 trillion last year. They have more than 2,500 signatories or so. EPF, Khazanah, KWAP, if I'm not mistaken, BIMB investment as well, and a few other foreign entities are part of this large gang. So, in essence, the money is gaining a conscience. Whether banks want to change or not, whether the financial sector wants to change or not, their shareholders will make them change. Not today, not tomorrow maybe, but sometime soon.
Thank you, Pramod. Okay, it's interesting that you're trying to engage with the audience just now. You start asking them to write sustainability and draw the line, which comes to be, dollar sign, right? So one key message that Pramod mentioned just now, to be sustainable, you have to be profitable. I think that is a very important key message, right? To make sure the agenda is, being followed by the stakeholders, the shareholders will have to play a role. That is another key message. Before I proceed to the next panelist, I would like to invite two audience, volunteer. So far, 4 speakers have spoken. What have you learned so far? What are the key messages that you have got? 2 volunteers. Point 1 and point 2. Come on. Organizer can give them some kind of incentive, some kind of, additional gift or what for being able to volunteer? No? Sorry? Amrin. There's a guy by the name of Amrin here. No, okay. Before I call another name, any volunteer? Volunteer? No? Yes? Okay. Microphone, please.
Since nobody wants to make a comment, I probably want to share a little bit of my own experience.
Great. Okay, thank you.
I like this amount. Trillions of dollars are available for green energy and all this. Let me tell you my experience. We plant trees in a degraded forest. I can assure you, none of the banks are giving me loan. So what are you talking about? I don't understand. We have planted 1,000 over hectares of tree, which take 8 to 9 years for us. We couldn't raise the money locally. We have to list our company in Singapore to raise the money. And you come here and tell me there are trillions and trillions of dollars. So I don't understand. Can somebody comment on it? Because you want to go and see the plantation, you can come to Sabah, I'll show you. We planted 1,000 over hectares. Every year we plant 1,000 over hectares. We finance everything through shareholders' fund. So I like to hear some comment from some bank. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. I think this session is very relevant then, right? If we are getting such comment from the floor. I don't know whether any one of you want to take that first. Dato? Yeah.
If I can just quickly reach out to that, quickly link to that. When I mentioned the green sovereign sukuk to be the tipping point, to be a policy response so that it precipitates every ecosystem within the whole national and economic recovery plan post-pandemic, this is where it will come in. When the government come up with a green financing, and fundraising for purposes of making sure there's no deforestation or building trees, that itself will precipitate into businesses like Datuk Seri punya business ni. And then Datuk Seri datang ke bank. And then bank bagilah green financing. Lepas dah bagi green financing tu, asset tu tadi, bank boleh pakai untuk utilization of its green sukuk. So it has to come from a policy response from the top, really.
Yeah.
Although the bank is, when I was chairman of Bank Rakyat, we are really making sure that at our level we tried our best. If there is no policy response, it will be just trickle lah. Tak adalah besar sangat and explode into a national agenda.
Thank you, Dato. Maybe Tan Sri Michael, you can organize a session with board of directors of the bank to talk about this, right? Then hopefully it will become a very meaningful conversation. Yes.
Hello, my name is Sohaimi. Just to answer you, the two things that I've learned so far. Number one is about it's meant for the future generation. And it's very important to start now. It's never too late, and this is really, really important. You can take all the 17 goals, and you see that it is really meant for future generations to come. Number two, I would like to pick up on Dato Badlisyah's, what do you call that? The 3E acronyms, PPP, people, profit, and planet. I would like to add another P, and that is profits. That applies to Sharia compliant banks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Organizer, how much more time we have? I still have two more panelists. I need to be mindful of the time. Organizer? We started late.
Another 5 minutes?
Another?
5 minutes?
No, definitely no.
No.
Okay, sorry. Okay, if that is the case, then I better move on to the next panelist, Mr. Yi, okay, with your introductory remarks.
Thank you. Can I have the slide control, please? So I'm going to talk about value accretive ESG integrated investing. Now, if we are talking about integrating ESG features or principle into investing, generally there are three segments of it, I would say: environment, social, and governance. Much has been talked early on by my learned panelists, and I'm not going to delve into all these three elements in details, but generally, if you look at environment, right, and we want to promote sustainable investment, and therefore it has to be very environmental conscious. You look at palm oil industry, for example. All the big palm oil plantations companies, they are already round table of sustainable palm oil certified. And even the smallholders, a lot of them have done it. If they have not, they are going to do it, right? Because without that certification, their harvest has got no market. There will be no buyer to their harvest or their produce if they are not certified. And hence, it's very important. And sometimes we have to encourage enterprises to do that. Other times, probably you have to apply a little bit of force. Over the weekend, I went to Laos, which is very famous for durian, and I saw a smallholder that planted the seeding, Musang King seeding, right, from the nursery and put it on the soil. And before this planter put it on the soil, he applied 4 kg of organic fertilizer. Purportedly, it will help with the growth of the root, right? So I think whether they are big corporations or they are SME or even sole proprietor, I think people are getting more and more conscious, right, to apply practice that would be environmental friendly, because it really would help eventually to their long-term business growth. As for social, right, there are a lot of aspects there, but I can call out in the case of labor safety. I myself have been the advisor to this Malaysian Master Builder Associations for more than 10 years. I've seen over the years some of the members, right, had got accidents in their construction site. Building structure collapse, loss of life, loss of time, loss of money to rebuild that, and more importantly, loss of reputation. So it's very important, right, for corporates to be very conscious and making sure that on the social aspect is well taken care of. On governance, it's very important for corporate to gain the trust of the lenders, gain the trust of the suppliers, investors, shareholders, and so on. In my so many years experience auditing companies and providing financial advice, I can see consistently those organizations that have very strong corporate governance, that have the trust of the other stakeholders, the trust of the business associates that they work with, always outperform in terms of the price-earning ratio. Now, if you are talking about the embedding ESG into economic activities undertaken by corporates, it's not just solely the role and responsibility of the corporates itself. But of course, the corporate captain must be able to see value in pursuing that pathway. There are also other stakeholders that come together to play a big part to ensure that the ecosystem is conducive for corporates to walk down that pathway. And this includes the regulators, right? The regulators, in the case of Malaysia, we have Bursa Malaysia that set the reporting requirement for corporate to comply with, right? So the regulators would set the framework. You will also set the KPI for corporates to observe, and you provide oversight to what extent the corporates has fulfilled the obligation. There are also financial reporting advisors, people like Deloitte, that would help corporates to come out with a master blueprint and roadmap and corporate vision, strategies, and operationalize those vision. And end of the day, we have to come out with a good report card to articulate what we have done, how far have we progressed, and what are the gaps that we need to do in the following years. Right? And last but not least would be the rating agencies that would come in to rate the corporate entities to what extent they have fulfilled, to what extent they have met the KPI, and more importantly, telling the corporates that which are the areas that they need to improve so that there will be a continuous improvement. A lot have been talked about financial institutions, so a large chunk of the audience today are from the banking and financial institutions. You play a pivotal role in ensuring that we go towards ESG mandated asset. You manage and you control the financial resources, and you determine which industry, which corporate you want to allocate more resources, right? So it's a very critical role that the banking sectors would play to ensure that we really move toward that direction, right? To fulfill the aspirational visions that we all possess. Now, I just would like to share with you a study that was done by Deloitte in US. And in this study, it showed that in 2012, ESG mandated assets make up only 11% of the total funds available, and that representation is increasing by the year. In 2014, it has gone up to 18%, 22% in 2016, 26% in 2018, and the projection is that by 2025, ESG mandated assets will go up to 50%. At the moment, Europe has got the largest share in the ESG mandated asset, which make up about 14 trillion US dollar, and US is coming up very strongly with 12 trillion US dollar, right? And when I was in the pre-U, I was first exposed to this economic theory. Price is a function of supply and demand. If there are more demand for ESG and mandated asset, naturally the value of that asset would grow, right? So the way forward, as you can see, right, there will be more and more demand for ESG mandated assets. And hence, if we believe in it, we put more resources into it, we will expect that the investment that we made, the assets that we hold, eventually the value will outperform those assets that are not ESG mandated. Last slide that I would like to share with you is $1 billion questions. A lot of you come from commercial bank, and you ask yourself a question: do sustainable banking outperform? There was a research that was done in the US by a group of organizations and supported by Deloitte on 100 top international banks, and we looked at the trend of their share price as well as the focus area that they pay on the ESG issues from 2007 to 2017, a 10-year horizon, because we just can't look at 1 or 2 years. We have to look at a relatively long period of time to be able to make the connections and correlation. And we came up with a set of material ESG issues to the bank, and those issues that are not material to the bank. What are those material issues to the bank? Access to finance, affordability, labor practice, data security, business ethic, diversity, and fair marketing and advertising. Right? This is to the bank. Different industry, they would have different focus on the ESG issues. The relevance and the strategic importance would vary from industry to industry. For the bank, this would be the set of material issues. What are less material issues to the bank? Greenhouse emission, energy management, water resource, and so on. Those are important matters, but not directly to the bank. Perhaps more important to the borrowers that got the fund from the bank. So the finding that we derive arising from that research is that, number one, commercial banks that consistently score high on material ESG issues outperform those banks that score low. And those top materiality portfolio banks outperform the bottom ones by 2.65% in average risk-adjusted return. And number two, those banks that score high on immaterial ESG issues does not cause any value disruption. Nonetheless, it failed to realize the desired benefit. And the third finding that we have got is that there's a need to standardize the way that the ESG information is to be provided. There's also a need to standardize what kind of ESG issues that should be prioritized. Right? So the short answer is that ESG as inspired or aspired commercial banks do outperform the peers in the longer run. So I hope with that short briefing and short share of thoughts, I'm able to convince you that to a certain extent, right, investing in sustainable ESG mandated assets is value creative, both for the corporates as well as the bank that's within it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yee. One thing that I pick up, there's no data in Malaysia, which is consistent with what Dato Badlisyah mentioned earlier. And you do mention that there is an incentive because based on the finding from the Europe, US and all that, those banks with high sustainability score actually do outperform others. Yeah. Okay, with that now let me go to the final panelist, Dr. Adam. Yeah.
Hello. Okay, this is a long discussion, and so thank you so much to the chair and my fellow panelists, and also thank you to Tan Sri Michael for this warm invitation. So let me start off with an anecdote. There are basically many shades of finance, many colors of finance. So you have the brown finance, which is the current so-called unsustainable finance from fossil fuel coal. You have also the dirty finance, which is black. Black finance, you can maybe bring in oil and gas, but more so the corruption aspect, which is the social governance. Right? But you also have green, and there are also many colors of green in finance, including greenwashing finance. Right? Yeah, many shades of finance. But also we have blue finance, right? Or green can be also Islamic finance as well. Some. Blue finance here, if you look at, this is something that we are not talking about more, but we recently was informed that the state of Selangor, through the IS Selangor enterprise, is also exploring an issuance of water sukuk. So in a way, it's blue finance or blue sukuk. And blue finance is important because if you aggregate the whole ocean economy as a whole. I mean, we derive a lot of economic value from ocean, whether it's tourism or our valuable protein. If you aggregate the whole ocean economy together, it's actually the seventh largest GDP in the world. Right? So that's how much value we derive from the ocean, from the water resources. So just to, as finance industry, we like to compete. So let me just compete with Pramod. Although Pramod still wins me by far in his running, he's a runner. So he mentioned a lot of trillions, and Dato also. So back in 2018, WWF Living Planet Index came up with a figure whereby we actually derive, from our nature, about $125 trillion annually. So nature contribution to the GDP is estimated at $125 trillion. So that's how much money has been somehow being given as free. How much the value of air, clean air that we're not really valuing. So today I have just 3 points, 3 T's after the colors. Targets, tools, and taxonomy. So let me start off with taxonomy. As Datuk Noripah mentioned, that the central bank, Bank Negara, and also through in the financial community through the JC3, the Joint Committee on Climate Change, together with the Securities Commission, has basically come out with a climate change taxonomy. But it still is at a very draft stage and infancy, whereby the financial institution is looking at how they can implement climate change based on taxonomy. Taxonomy is basically a classification system, so that it helps financial institutions to classify their financing or investment according to certain standard. But it's also key for the financial community in Malaysia to move or to aspire towards a gold standard, which is basically the EU taxonomy. So that was launched in March 2020 by a group of high-level technical experts over a month of 20 months. So that can be a long-term aspiration. But climate change is just one side of it. There's also the nature aspect, which is the biodiversity angle, where I mentioned earlier that we derive $100 trillion annually from nature. And nature and climate change, there's an overlap, and therefore it's important to note that there's not just the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure, that is being now implemented on a voluntary basis in Malaysia. Bursa is already incorporating the TCFD in their sustainability reporting. The same with the policymaker, like the central bank. But WWF and its international network partners like the UN, EPFI, and so on are also starting to embark on the TNFD, which is Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosure. So you have the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure. But now we are looking at setting up international task force for nature financial disclosure. And I think a number of banks in this region, like DBS, is looking into supporting, and we are looking at how Malaysian banks can be supporting. So that's more on taxonomy and disclosure. But there's also tools. Tools here means you have a number of banks are also exploring using different tools to basically assess climate change and environmental risks. One of the tools is basically science-based target tools, whereby banks will assess companies based on their CO2 emission, and not just emission for the sake of emission, but also the materiality of emission. So how emission is causing, for example, you take agriculture companies, for example, if you embed the risk management aspect into from a climate change perspective, which means that your raw materials might have price fluctuation because of climate change or limited supply, not just price but also volume, and that will impede your profitability and growth prospect. In a way, it will also affect your creditworthiness and therefore your debt payment obligation to the bank. So this is one way that you can bring in not just how much CO2 in terms of scope 1, but also along the value chain, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 CO2. So those are some of the tools that should be done based on the scientific rather than just tick box or matter of index checking just for the fact that you are part of the FTSE for good and therefore it's good enough. Right? The last one I think which is more interesting is the T on technology, and technology is not Silverlake technology, but technology here means solutions. Okay? So we have this thing known as the nature-based solution, as what I think that Noripah mentioned. There are two documentaries. So again, I think last year I watched one in Netflix. I think Promote, you would like it. This is called The Game Changers. So in the Game Changers is interesting because in a way I was influenced, right? And I'm trying to be as disciplined as possible to have salad every day. So in the Game Changer, basically they actually do an empirical study scientifically on how athletes perform if they don't eat so much of protein. I mean, like normal meat-based protein. And they found that their performance are even much better by relying on vegetation or vegetable salads or meat-based protein, but not actually. I mean, organic meat. So those are also interesting in the sense that it is you don't need. Although salad can be deemed as quite expensive if you order from restaurants and all that, but you can make your own salad, which is actually quite cheap. One pack of salad is about, I think, 7 ringgit. It's triple wash and just so it's actually much cheaper and it's much more fulfilling, nature-based. But those are at the individual level, and if you want to be an athlete. But there's also nature-based solution in the sense that you mitigate flood risk by not being reactive, but you use nature as a solution to even prevent flood from happening. So one way that we see nature-based solution as defined by the European Commission is that you have mangroves in the coastline to actually protect rather than sandbag. Sandbag is actually not nature-based. It's actually extractive in nature. So mangroves has been proven, and these are all based on scientific environmental science, whereby it can help not just for resilience in terms of flood mitigation, but it also helps in terms of the biodiversity within the coastline. And to address your concern, and it's actually very interesting that Pakistan, during the COVID-19, one of their green stimulus package was to, they already have this, the Prime Minister already had this 10 billion tree campaign, and during the COVID-19 they just reignited by basically employing jungle workers. These are the green jungle workers, whereby because of people are getting unemployed, then they are asked to plant trees, and they are being paid $3 a day. So $3 is very little from context of Malaysia, but Pakistan, it is sufficient for you to at least have a couple of meals a day. And tree planting is an easy skill, but it actually kills few birds with one stone. So that is at the government stimulus package level. WWF is also exploring. We have rebranded the practice from bankable water solution to bankable nature solution, BNS. And this is where some of the blended finance mechanism is being explored, not just at the banking sector, but also combining different concessionary developmental finance with commercial finance. So one example is, we have one in Sabah. I'm not really familiar with the project, but it's known as the Tropical Asia Fund. I think it's about $170 million fund, whereby and it's not just for Malaysia, but it's also Malaysia, Laos, and I think Indonesia or Vietnam. Three regions and 3 countries in this region. So this is where they will support. These funds are being set up by developmental financial institutions, impact investors, and like-minded financiers to basically support the restoration. There's another project in Indonesia which I'm a bit more familiar. It's known as the Royal Lestari Utama. Basically, this is where BNP Paribas and a few other impact investors are involved in structuring this deal. Again, it's blending, and US aid is there. So in structured finance, it's important to have de-risking mechanism. De-risking here means that there are certain investors who have stronger or higher appetite to take more risk. So they're usually the equity investors. But in this case, it's not just the equity investors. The USAID, which is a philanthropic developmental institution, they were to take the first loss in the sense that they are basically guaranteeing whatever loss that will first happen, they will basically absorb that risk. So that makes the commercial capitalistic investor to be more attracted, because you have someone who is basically taking that first loss. But interestingly, in the Indonesia case, it's not just restoration, but at the restoration process, they also have economic value, which is rubber plantation, which is done in a very sustainable manner. WWF was a conservation partner there. And one way to secure cash flow from these smallholders, again touching on Eddie's point on SMEs, is whereby they got Michelin to basically become the corporate off-taker of the rubber yield from that particular project. So in that way, not only the investors are happy to invest because you have someone who is de-risking, but also you have a corporate off-taker who is buying from the smallholders. So that there's revenue generation and cash flow.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Adam. Okay, Dr. Adam covered more from the scientific approach. He talks about taxonomy tools and technology, but one key message, please remember, eat salad. Okay, so that's the key message from Dr. Adam. Okay, we actually are running out of time, but Dato' Badlisyah just want to make a very quick comment.
After everyone has spoken, I thought I should just give a little bit of clarity for everyone's benefit. Sustainable banking is not about a bank being ESG compliant. A lot of banks, most banks are ESG compliant. They are very concerned about the environment, they take care of, and they do a lot of social responsibility activity and things like that. So when it comes to investors, they all love banking assets because many banks are ESG compliant, right? They comply with all the relevant funds, the AUM that we have, the billions of funds that are out there. They invest in banks because banks are ESG compliant. But sustainable banking is not about a bank being ESG compliant. Sustainable banking is about doing banking in a manner where you impose ESG on the financial transaction. All right? So when they created, in terms of credit consideration, right, the credit model change. They must put planet and people inside the credit model, not just profitability. All right? So every financial transaction needs to comply with ESG. So the question is, how many banks out there in Malaysia and globally that have signed on to do that? Only 76 of the biggest bank in the world has signed on. Right? And when the standard came out under United Nations in terms of reporting and whatever in World Bank in 2017, the sign-up was very fast. About 40 of them signed up. And then the next year in 2018, it dwindled to less than 20. Last year in 2019, only 9 banks signed up. All right? So the question is, for this year, is it going to be 1? Is it going to be 2? Is it going to be 0? What about next year and the next? How many more banks will sign on to commit themselves to sustainable banking. I think that is the key of our discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dato. Thank you so much. I don't think I have time to really summarize. Again, I think I've made comments to the individual points, but I would just like to, close with this, that I think ESG is important. 6 panel in a 75 minutes to talk about something as big as this, and to have passionate people like this, definitely not enough. You probably have to have a one whole day conference just to cover this, yeah? So we don't even have enough time to be more engaging with the audience. But otherwise, I think I would like to thank you, all the panelists, all the speakers, for, such a valuable insights and for sharing the experience and the perspective. Yeah, and with that, thank you, organizer, again for putting us together for this. Hopefully, we can, have something similar in the future again with a longer time. Right? Thank you very much. Thank you.